Welcome to Shadow Fable. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another spine-chilling tale. Turn down the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for tonight's eerie journey into darkness. When Daniel first spotted the listing online, he couldn't believe his luck. An 1870s Victorian house, beautifully preserved, nestled quietly at the edge of town. Exactly the place he and his two roommates, Jake and Mike, had always talked about renting. A perfect combination of affordability, character, and space. Danielsville, Pennsylvania wasn't their first choice, but the charmingly eerie appeal of the old property was irresistible. Besides, the landlord offered them a deal they simply couldn't pass up. From their first tour, they sensed something unusual about the house. It seemed as if the place had stood frozen in time, with original hardwood floors, antique fixtures, and wallpaper faded by decades of memories. Yet beneath the charm, an unsettling feeling lingered, an unspoken heaviness. The air in the rooms felt strangely still, and shadows seemed to stretch a little longer, moving subtly, as though dancing just outside the corner of their vision. The boys brushed it off as old house jitters. After all, every place has its quirks, and creaking floors and settling walls weren't unusual, but their confidence started to waver within the first week. It began with whispers, soft, barely audible murmurs late at night, like distant conversations, just faint enough to dismiss as imagination or dreams. Soon, though, the activity escalated. Objects moved inexplicably. Car keys appeared in odd places. Doors gently closed themselves, and lights would flicker on and off without reason. Danielsville's locals would cast knowing glances when they heard where the newcomers lived. Their smiles would tighten, their voices lower, always avoiding any direct comments about the home's history. Then came the footsteps. At first, Mike thought Jake was just restless, pacing the hallway at night. When confronted, Jake's bewildered reaction made it clear he thought the same about Mike. But one night, as the footsteps slowly shuffled across the creaky hardwood, all three realized the chilling truth. Each had assumed it was one of the others. That realization hung heavily between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that something else was sharing the house. As weeks passed, the house became increasingly active. Whispered conversations drifted through empty rooms. Distant laughter echoed down the hallways, and doors they'd locked tightly swung open by themselves. But it was Jake who experienced the worst of it. One sleepless night, Jake awoke feeling as though someone was watching him. His heart pounded in his chest, a cold sweat breaking across his brow. Slowly, carefully, he opened his eyes. His bedroom door stood wide open, revealing the long hallway beyond, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight. And there, in the doorway, stood the dark outline of a tall figure, unmoving, silent, and watching. Jake's pulse quickened, fear gripping him as he stared, paralyzed. Hours seemed to pass until exhaustion claimed him, pulling him unwillingly back into restless sleep. In the morning, he dismissed it as a nightmare, but the dread lingered in the pit of his stomach, gnawing and relentless. Jake's experience wasn't isolated. Soon after, Daniel and Mike began noticing shadowy movements themselves. Danielsville's public records hinted at tragedy. Mysterious deaths, disappearances, and a family who abruptly abandoned the property decades ago. But details were sparse, deliberately hidden by locals keen to protect their small-town reputation. Determined to uncover the truth, Mike began researching obsessively, poring over old archives at the local library. The more he learned, the more he wished he hadn't. Previous residents had reported similar phenomena, describing shadowy visitors who seemed to grow bolder over time. The earliest records were from the 1890s, detailing a tragic fire that took the lives of an entire family, leaving behind nothing but ashes and whispers of restless spirits left behind. Mike's anxiety deepened when he realized the dates aligned exactly to the nights they'd experienced disturbances. The footsteps and whispers always peaked around the anniversary of a mysterious fire that had ravaged part of the home over a century earlier. One night, the house decided to reveal its secrets to all three occupants simultaneously. The evening started quietly, deceptively peaceful. A late autumn storm had settled over Danielsville, the wind moaning through the trees, heavy rain tapping against window panes, setting an ominous rhythm. Daniel, Jake, and Mike huddled in the living room, each silently nursing their discomfort, hesitant to admit the growing unease that had overtaken their once idyllic home. It started subtly, with the faint creaking of the floorboards upstairs, methodical and deliberate, footsteps pacing back and forth in a relentless loop. The three roommates exchanged uneasy glances, each silently confirming the other's dread. "Enough is enough," Jake finally whispered, setting down his drink. "I can't ignore this anymore. We have to see what's going on." Mike grabbed an old baseball bat leaning against the doorway, and Daniel picked up a flashlight. With every step ascending the stairs, their hearts beat faster, anticipation heavy in the air. As they reached the second floor, the pacing abruptly ceased. Silence flooded the hallway, an oppressive, unnatural quiet that pressed down on them like a tangible force. Then, with no warning, the temperature plummeted. A biting chill swept through the corridor, leaving their breath visible in ghostly puffs. The overhead bulb flickered, casting distorted shadows that danced and writhed across peeling wallpaper. At the hallway's far end, the door to Jake's room stood slightly ajar. It slowly began to creak open further, moving on its own as if inviting them forward. Trembling, but driven by a desperate need for answers, Jake pushed ahead, his friends close behind. The room was pitch black, darker than it should have been even at night, as if something inside swallowed all the available light. Daniel flipped the switch, but the lights remained stubbornly dark. Panic surged through them, their breathing quickening into shallow gasps. And then they saw it. A shadow figure stood in the center of the room, tall and impossibly slender, darker than the surrounding gloom. Its shape shimmered slightly, edges blurred as if shifting between this world and another. Crimson eyes opened slowly within the dark silhouette, glowing with a sinister, almost mocking intensity. An eerie whisper filled the room, impossibly close yet distant. "Leave, or join us, forever." The boys stood frozen, horror flooding through their veins. Mike mustered enough courage to stammer out a demand, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from us?" The shadowy figure tilted its head, the red eyes narrowing, seemingly amused by his fear. "The fire took us, and now we take back." Suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. Doors slammed violently, pictures crashed from walls, and an agonized wail echoed throughout the house, rattling the windows. The three friends bolted downstairs, stumbling toward the front door. Yet, no matter how hard they tried, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself held them captive. Panicked and desperate, Jake smashed a window open with a chair, the cold air rushing in, slicing through their terror. One by one, they scrambled out into the yard, gasping, shaking, and staring back at the darkened house. From outside, it seemed to pulse with malevolent life, shadows swirling visibly behind curtains, watching them with palpable anger. They never returned to that house, leaving behind their belongings and a deposit they didn't dare reclaim. but they carried away something far more haunting. Questions they couldn't answer, and a fear that would linger for years. Eventually, Mike discovered the house's dark history. Stories of fires, disappearances, and untimely deaths stretching back generations. Locals knew it as cursed ground, a place where sorrow had seeped into the walls, staining its halls with restless souls, desperate for release or revenge. But to this day, that night still haunts Jake the most. The memory of that tall, shadowy figure, its crimson eyes locked onto him, whispering its terrifying invitation into darkness. Some places were never meant for the living, and the old 1870s house in Danielsville was undoubtedly one of them.